Report.
Tonight, I'll talk to one of the so-called doctors handing out medical certificates to let children skip school to protest against global warming. And boy, is there a split on that between Victoria's new Premier and her deputy of the right. Well, well, well. Also tonight, one of my panellists, I've got to admit, is now been ordered to a tribunal for saying that women's toilets are for women. And she'll be talking about this persecution. And the great immigration scandal. We have a bank boss saying that housing loans are now for the rich. Is mass immigration killing the great Australian dream? And massive embarrassment for the Foreign Minister. Guess what's been found in a hospital? But just before that, this scandal about the 80 foreign criminals, now 81, that the government has released into the community just gets worse. The Immigration Minister today admitted to just the kind of people he'd let out.
Sex offenders, a murderer, at least one murderer. I believe there are 3 murderers. There are several sex offenders.
Seriously? Out in our streets are a man who raped a 10-year-old boy, an Afghan refugee who bashed elderly women in their homes, and this Malaysian hitman who assassinated a young woman and then blew up her body. And the only thing that our Immigration Minister says is done is to issue what he calls appropriate visas, and checks that these people will stay where they should be. Oh, that's so comforting. Now, I don't blame the government for these people having to be let out necessarily, because a majority of High Court judges made that call that foreign criminals had to be freed from indefinite detention if they couldn't be sent back home to their country because either they wouldn't be accepted or they might be executed. But how much preparation did the government do for this day? Why didn't it issue visas to all those people that said, well, sure, you can stay on Christmas Island, as immigration lawyer Simon Jeans suggested on the show last night? Why didn't they pass emergency laws to fix this problem? Well, here's a thought. How about putting up these criminals in the streets where these judges live? That might have concentrated their minds, but now it's all a bit late. Foreign Minister Penny Wong. She's just been humiliated by evidence from a hospital in Gaza. And maybe now she should apologise to Israel and to Australia's Jews. And I need to show you this because it helps to expose this appalling failure of leadership from this Albanese government as Jews in this country fear a new Jew hatred. I mean, they're living in fear with Jewish shops tagged, as the Nazis once tagged shops, where Muslim mobs now scream insults and attack Jews outside a synagogue in Jewish Caulfield, when boys are allegedly threatened with murder for showing an Israeli flag, where a man in his 60s cycling in Melbourne's Chapel Street on the weekend when his Israeli flag gets knocked off his bike and punched and kicked. And, of course, when a mob at the Sydney Opera House chants, "Gas the Jews." Now, Wong and the Prime Minister have done pathetically little to defend Australia's 100,000 Jews. Wong, in particular, has added fuel to this fire instead by quickly switching the talk to Islamophobia instead of, what we're actually looking at, what I've just been showing you. And on Sunday, she effectively accused Israel of war crimes as it fights the Hamas terrorist group that controls Gaza and started this war on October 7 by slaughtering 1,200 Jews and taking 240 hostages, including these, many of them women and children, like these 3 little girls, still in captivity. Wong was furious that Israel was now attacking hospitals in Gaza.
I would make this point in relation to hospitals and medical facilities, that international humanitarian law does require the protection of hospitals, of patients and of medical staff. And we do call on Israel to cease the attacking of hospitals. These are facilities protected under international law.
Now, even before this evidence I'm going to show you, what Wong was saying there looked extremely stupid. Now, as I showed you last night, Hamas terrorists have really been filmed shooting from these hospitals, and one even has emerged from a hospital carrying a rocket-propelled grenade. See, Hamas really does use these hospitals as military bases. But today, even more embarrassing evidence for the Foreign Minister. Evidence that the hospitals that Wong said Israel must not attack have been used by Hamas to keep its hostages prisoner. Now, Israeli forces have taken over the Rantisi Children's Hospital, where they found a whole armoury, including explosive grenades, more rocket-propelled grenades as well. And more ominously, in the basement, they found a chair with women's clothing and rope ties lying on the floor and a baby's feeding bottle above it, next to an improvised toilet. An improvised toilet in a hospital? Well, further in was a kitchenette, also improvised. Beyond that, another room, also underneath the hospital.
You're now entering into the room where we suspect the hostages were being held. I want you to look at this room. People are putting curtains with nothing above, just wall. No reason to put here a curtain unless you want to film.
And on the wall was a roster.
In Arabic, this list says, we are in an operation. The operation against Israel started in the 7th of October. This is a Guardian list where every terrorist writes his name and every terrorist has his own shift guarding the people that were here.
Now, I know this is not 100% definitive evidence that some of the hostages were actually there. The Israelis strongly suspected. But can Wong seriously argue that the Israelis should not have taken over this heavily armed hospital, which had a tunnel right near it? Now, her comments on Sunday were ignorant and factually incorrect. Hospitals like this have been used as military centres by Hamas and even, it seems now, as prisons for hostages, given that they are legitimate targets in war. But I am sorry to say today that it's not just the foreign minister who is helping to demonise Israel by her ignorance and thus make Jews here the target of Jew-hating extremists. I'll give you two more shocking examples, one from last night, one from today. Last night, the ABC filmed an edition of its flagship Q&A show with a disturbing difference.
We've made the decision to conduct tonight's difficult and sensitive discussion without a live studio audience.
And that wasn't the only difference, as the Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs pointed out.
Well, it's worth reflecting on where we're sitting now, PK. I mean, there's no audience out here. There's a very significant police contingent out the front of the public broadcaster in Australia. I've not appeared on Q&A before and had to have security protection out the front. It's deeply concerning that this is the way we have to talk about this issue.
Someone on that panel should have made very explicit the conclusion from that. All this security over just the chat show, for heaven's sake. It wasn't because of a fear that a pack of Jews would be running wild and attacking people. Jews are not the threat. Now you look at the difference between Jewish rallies, peaceful, respectful, and the pro-Palestinian ones, often aggressive. And we are seeing in that a cultural difference that is critical to understanding what's going on here, in my opinion, and also in Israel. And if that wasn't disturbing enough last night, you check the performance on the show by Nasser Mashni, his president of the Australian Palestinian Advocacy Network, a man who has led chants at protests for the destruction of Israel from the river to the sea. Now, Mashni on this show couldn't even condemn Hamas, the terrorist group, for the massacre. Although he claimed he had before, he wasn't going to go through his performative circus, he said, trying to find where he explicitly did condemn it, nor would he even demand the release of Jewish hostages.
The call is for a ceasefire, but there's not a call very often for all of the hostages to be released. Is that a demand that you think needs to be met before that can be considered?
Patricia, I think we need to go back to the reality that this is not a 35-day-old conflict.
Really. Now, today, more bad signs, really, particularly for Australia's Jews. The National Press Club again betrayed its leftist agenda by inviting on Francesca Albanese. Now, she's the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Palestinian human rights and virulently anti-Israeli, as she promptly proved on this show, in this speech, in front of an audience with plenty of people, you know, with that radical chic Palestinian scarf on, that kind of stuff, who then cheered every unhinged insult that Albanese hurled at Israel, like this.
There is an apartheid regime.
Now, Albanese was also on the Q&A show last night, even said that Israel was just like Hamas, you know, but actually worse, you know, being genocidal.
When I hear Hamas leaders and when I hear Israeli leaders, particularly in these historical moments, they seem to me calling for the whole destruction of the other. But the difference is that unlike Hamas, what Israel is enforcing that reality. Hamas is not.
What a clown. Hamas actually calls for the destruction of Israel and for Jews to be killed, calls for it in its charter, its foundation document. And if it had Israel's weaponry, a nuclear bomb, for instance, it would do to all Israelis what it did to 1,200 of them on October 7. Israel, which does have that weaponry, has most certainly not tried to wipe out Gaza and the Palestinians. It's not in any of its chartered documents. So Albanese there is a poisonous bigot, and it shames the press club that she was invited to speak. Like I said, the ABC had her on last night too. So it's people like these, promoted by our cultural institutions, who are feeding the hatreds that are now unleashed on our Jews in our streets in Australia. Now, serious people who understand how our civilization is under threat here as well, the Western civilization, not just Jews, if they do not speak up, I fear something really terrible could happen here. And the person who should be speaking up the loudest to prevent it is our Prime Minister. Why won't he? There's going to be another school strike for the climate on this week. Now, it couldn't be held on a Saturday because that's their weekend, so it's going to be on Friday. And already you got the children doing childish things like today, disrupting the Victorian Parliament and unfurling their banners to the smug approval of the grown-up children of the Greens Party. He loved it. Now, the idea of children wagging school to lecture Australians on how best to power our 21st century economy without going broke has split the Victorian government. The premiers of the left thinks it's great.
Rallies are fundamental. Being able to come together and hold a rally, a peaceful rally, depending on the issue that you're concerned about or the issue that you're exercised about, that's a fundamental principle of our democracy. As we consider this issue of attendance or otherwise, that we give students and schools the respect and the space to work through these issues at the local level.
But a Deputy Premier and rival of the right think, well, children are actually best off learning before lecturing.
The 23rd of November is a school day, and the expectation is that normal attendance will be required and students will be encouraged to attend school.
Meanwhile, two global warming activists, Professor David Caroli and Dr. Nick Abel, a Extinction Rebellion protester and honorary associate professor with the ANU's Fenner School of Environment and Society, they're issuing 6 certificates online saying such and such student, fill in your own name, is unfit to go to school due to a major health concern. Symptoms include increased anxiety from the federal government's ongoing climate policy inaction, elevated stress on seeing the impacts of climate emergency now in Australia and worldwide. So they should skip school instead. Protest. Nick Abel joins me now. Nick Abel, thank you very much for your time. Aren't you actually being dishonest, issuing fake certificates to kids you've never met, saying they're too sick to go to school but not too sick to protest?
Thanks for inviting me on the show, Andrew. The sick notes are given because the climate is sick. That's the symbolism of what these school children are doing, and there's nothing official about them. It's an endorsement by people like me saying,
it's dishonest.
We're with you. We're with you.
It's dishonest.
We're on your side, yeah. And I'm very happy
it's
to
dishonest.
endorse
You say
what
the
they're
students, well, look, well, A, it's dishonest, but B, I also think you're actually contributing to exactly the malady you think they're suffering from. You say the students have a major health concern, anxiety and stress about global warming. They're worried about global warming. It's not what global warming is actually doing to them, it's their stress about worrying it. Don't you add to that stress by telling children the world is, as you just said, sick or going to hell through global warming? Doesn't that make them more anxious?
Andrew, there's no question that the world as we now know it is headed for climate hell, given the present trajectory and the fact that we're still increasing, not decreasing, our emissions, and the fact that Australia is the world's third largest exporter of fossil fuels. There's no question at all that we're headed for deep trouble. So the kids are not making this up, and it is my job. I'm terrified.
Think you're making it up. Yeah, but you're terrified.
Well,
but the thing is, seriously, the science is not with you that we're going to hell, that these kids face any serious impact in their lifetime. And I'm just wondering why you are terrifying children about something that might be in your mind. But if you go outside and look, the world is actually pretty safe and secure in terms of the weather, at any rate.
I wish you were right, Andrew. Sadly, you're so badly wrong. You really don't get and understand climate science about tipping points and about carbon stores, which will be released as soon as we cross certain temperature thresholds. We are on a track.
I've been waiting for that for years.
Trouble.
Never comes. No, but the reason is, you see, this prediction,
it's on track.
It's always going to come,
Andrew,
right? remember
Andrew,
15
you need
years
to
ago,
read.
16 years ago, we were going to run out of water.
No idea what
you read. was going to run out of water. The dams wouldn't fill. You know, please.
I wish this was funny. I've no idea what you read, where you invent these ideas from. It's complete twaddle. And
it was Tim Flannery.
If you read
Tim Flannery,
if you followed the 98% of climate scientists who absolutely,
well, that's a bogus statistic. You know that, don't you? That's a completely bogus statistic. Why are you repeating it?
Well, it's very, very hard to find a scientist who is not convinced about the reality of climate change, and I really wish that you were right.
The reality of climate change. You mean climate change catastrophe? I'll name you a few. I can name you a whole bunch. Better credentialed than you.
I'm sure.
Right? No, I can. And Nersheviv and William Happer and all sorts of people. Richard Lindzen and people that actually believe in man-made global warming, but they don't believe in the catastrophe. And I'm just saying, here you are issuing a fake certificate about a fake catastrophe to kids that don't deserve to be terrified like this. And I think that's irresponsible, but I thank you for coming on the show to have your say. Nick Abel, thank you for your time.
Well,
I mean, really seriously, terrifying children about global warming is really child abuse.
I'm so concerned with the fact that if they're not going to change anything, then what's going to happen to humankind? What's going to happen to the whole world if no one does anything?
Joining me again is someone who doesn't doubt man-made warming at all, but he does fight the scaremongering. Bjorn Lomborg is president of the Copenhagen Consensus and best-selling author of books including Best Things First, his latest, go buy it, False Alarm, and of course the classic, The Skeptical Environmentalist. Bjorn, great to have you on the show again. First, the scaremongering. I mean, it just really ticks me off that people like that, terrifying kids, how much danger are these school children really under from global warming? Are they going to die earlier, for instance?
No. So again, I think what we have also missed in communicating the whole message from climate change, as you point out, it's a real issue and it is a problem. But what you need to understand is the underlying growth of almost everything we know in human society leaves us better off. But what climate change does, it slows down slightly that immense progress that we're seeing. So even the UN is expecting by the end of the century, the average person will not live as he or she does now at about 73 years. but on average be somewhere between 88 and 100 years old on average. We're not going to be living shorter lifetimes. We're going to be living much longer lifetimes. And what climate change does is it slows down that progress. So instead of perhaps getting to 100, we'll only get to 97. And yes, that is a problem, but it's not the end of the world.
And of course, you know, we see really good signs that, you know, if you're worried about what the weather could do to us, for example, food production hitting a new record. I mean, this is not what was predicted under some of those models, is it?
Well, actually, most of the models will tell you that we're going to see ever more food being produced. But again, because of climate change, it'll be slightly less. Ever more. So we will be able to feed people better. We will see ever fewer people starving. We'll see fewer kids dying from hunger, but we'll see slightly slower progress on this because of climate change. That's a very different message than what you hear in the media, which is this is the end of the world. And you just saw that that crying young girl. And of course, if you believe that, you actually think this is the only issue that we should be concerned about. But what you need to hear is, yes, there is a problem. No, it's not the end of the world. And that's important because it means you can start thinking smartly about this instead of just being panicked and say, we need to spend money on everything that could possibly help avoid this catastrophe.
Bjorn, explain then this catastrophizing. I mean, we've had here, right, we've had claims that the Great Barrier Reef is dying from global warming. In fact, as you know, coral cover is near record highs. We've had our Prime Minister last week agree to take in 280 so-called climate refugees from Tuvalu because it's sinking, 280 a year. But in fact, as I think you've recently pointed out, the research says something very different about Tuvalu. It's growing. It's actually growing. So why these absurd scares?
Well, I think it's simply because we're asking people. So the whole climate story is asking people to spend somewhere between 5 and 15% of global GDP over this entire century on transforming the world from its current fossil fuel-based economy to a green economy. This is going to be fantastically costly. This is orders of magnitude more costly than any other thing that we've ever done. For instance, probably the most costly policy decision before that was the restitution from the Versailles Treaty forced on Germany, which was, of course, unaffordable. But we're talking about something that's much, much larger. We're talking about upwards of $2,000 trillion in cost over the century. You're not going to get people to do that unless you scare the pants off of them. So the reality here is it's a problem. And what we should do with the problem is figure out how do we smartly attack that. We should have some measures that actually reduce carbon emissions right now. We should also look at innovation, which is by far going to be the biggest issue. But of course, that doesn't sound like you're really taking this seriously enough. And so you paint up the end of the world and then you say, spend everything.
Well, that's what makes me wonder whether in some ways it's another one of these millenarian cults, sort of, you know, it's interesting. There's a little bit of a Christian eschatology here, you know, where sinful man going to wipe out, you know, we're going to drown like Noah's flood because we have got our relationship with the earth gods, whatever, are out of sync. But I also wonder, you mentioned the money. Is it also because there's so much money in it that so many people are pushing this along? I mean, you pointed out the other day that in the United States, non-government organisations in 2021 spent, and this is US dollars, between $8 and $9 billion annually on this issue. I mean, this is just incredible amount of money.
Yes. And the depressing part of the story was from New York Times that they no longer can afford the environmental organization. They can no longer afford to care for wildlife because nobody's giving them money to that. Everyone is just giving them money for climate. Now, obviously, there's a lot of money in climate. And I think some people obviously get hitched on this because of the money. But I think the fundamental point is a lot of people feel just like the crying girl we saw earlier, just feel this is the end of the world. I need to do something. And this is because we constantly tell people one side of the story. We tell them, here's a fire, here's a drought, here's a flood, without looking at the overall picture, which of course is that we're better able to handle all of those catastrophes and actually have less impact on humans, less impact on the economy, and be better off. We are going to live longer, we're going to be better educated, we're going to have higher incomes, we're going to be much better off, but because of global warming, we'll be slightly less, much better off. That's a very different story, and we need to get that story out because we need to stop scaring people and start getting to realize this is one of the many problems we need to fix in the 21st century, but it's not the only one, and it's not where we should be spending all the money.
Bjorn, thank you so much for that, mate. I really appreciate your good common sense, and as always, I admire your gardening prowess. I wish my plants looked as healthy as yours. Thank you so much indeed for your time. Love to catch up. Honestly, after the break, one of the show's regular panellists is, like I said, in legal trouble. After saying, and look, I'm sorry to shock you, right? Turn the children away. A woman's toilet is for a woman. Is she going to back down? Find out after this. Okay, like I said, one of my regular panellists is in legal trouble, and it stems from this rally in Hobart last year. It was very ugly, where a visiting feminist, Kelly J. Keane, a campaigner for women's rights, was howled down by the left and slandered as a friend of Nazis. It was so ugly that the only person to now face a tribunal from that incident was not one of those protesters who stopped a woman from speaking, who bullied her and abused her as a kind of Nazi, threatened her. Not one of them. It was instead Louise Elliot, business consultant and Hobart City Councillor, who joins me each Tuesday, along with Will Kingston, host of Australiana, a weekly podcast from The Spectator, Australian Politics and Culture. Louise, I'll start baking cakes and putting files in them for you. You've been ordered by Tasmania's Anti-Discrimination Commissioner, Sarah Bolt, no relation, thank God, to face Tasmania's Civil and Administrative Tribunal for something you said at the same rally. Not that anyone could hear you. Why? What did you say?
Yes, that's right. This is an insane situation. So I've been referred to the Tasmanian Civil and Administrative Tribunal because at that event, a pro-women's event, I said in a public setting that trans women are trans women and remain biological men. I also said that you can't be raped with a penis if there is no penis present. And as far as I'm concerned, as far as the vast majority of Australians are concerned, those are undeniable facts. So I have been basically thrown in my face is that I have incited hatred on the basis of gender identity for stating publicly those true facts. So I'll be absolutely fighting this as high as it needs to go. My legal team's ready. We know how important this case is, how important this is for our protecting our implied constitutional rights, our right to freedom of belief, freedom of expression, freedom of political communication. So we'll bring it on because the truth and women's rights are too important for us to back down.
Now, Will Kingston, I can imagine some people didn't like what Louise said, might have even felt offended if they could have heard her over the screaming and the abuse. But what do you make of the law stepping in here? I mean, is that right?
No, it's not, Andrew. I just cannot believe that we're having this conversation in Australia. It seems to me that sometimes degrade politicians and overpaid civil servants wake up one morning and go, oh, how do we deal with this free speech issue? How do I solve that particular problem? Without recognising we've been having these conversations for thousands of years. We've come to a conclusion in the West that you set a very high bar for free speech. That doesn't even mean it has to be factual. Louise said that she was stating facts, which she was, but if she wasn't, who cares? Because on balance, we've decided in Western society that we should set that very high bar for free speech. Unfortunately, there aren't enough politicians on the right, there aren't enough figures in Australia and across the West that are saying you should be allowed to say things that are, in inverted commas, hateful, because on balance, whilst that is morally inappropriate, it is still better to legally be allowed to say those things. Unfortunately, we seem to have forgotten that, and it is the single greatest threat that Australia's civil liberties face at the moment.
Well, I think how we handle disagreement is, in fact, one of the critical issues. We face here a difference, don't we? I mean, we have people like Louise and Kelly J. Keane being abused and shouted down and bullied and intimidated. It wasn't just in Hobart, by the way. This happened in Melbourne. It happened in Canberra. Happened badly in Auckland as well. And then you get speech actually crushed again by a tribunal or an attempt to crush it. Louise, this is not the way we should be handling arguments, is it?
Not at all. And Will's completely right. This is at complete odds with a democracy. And in our culture is so fueled by offence at the moment. Well, it has been for quite a while, but we all have things we can be offended by, but that doesn't mean that that person's opinion or that person's beliefs are otherwise invalid and should not be heard. I mean, it's censorship. This is threatening and intimidating. This is using legislation to silence people whose beliefs or that some people disagree with. And basically, it is a tactic to shut people up, and it's really concerning. It must end. And I won't be standing for it, and we'll be taking it as high as we need to, because our fundamental right to hold a fair and valid opinion is paramount to being in a democracy and to being an Australian. Of course, there's a real place for incitement of hatred laws. Look, turn on the news, you can see real incitement of hatred, and stating a fact is not.
But hatred. But also, inciting hatred is a little different to not agreeing with a particular position and offending someone. Being offended is not the same at all. Will, I said last week the former Prime Minister Scott Morrison still had experience to offer the federal Liberals, and he should be brought back to the front bench, you know, to just add with a couple of other people I mentioned, Matt Canavan, Keith Pitt, also experienced, good performers. I said he'd be a good foreign minister. I said Scott Morrison would be a good foreign minister. Now, notice, by the way, he's now out and about in the media. On my show last week, Sherry Markson's today, Chris Kenny's fine documentary yesterday, tonight again after the show. The odd thing is, Will, Britain's Prime Minister has just brought back another former Prime Minister, David Cameron, and made him Foreign Secretary or Foreign Minister in their words. Here he is.
I know it's not usual for a Prime Minister to come back in this way, but I believe in public service. The Prime Minister asked me to do this job, and it's a time where we have some daunting challenges as a country. The conflict in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, and of course, I hope that 6 years as Prime Minister, 11 years leading the Conservative Party gives me some useful experience and contacts and relationships and knowledge that I can help the Prime Minister. That's why I'm doing the job, and I'm delighted to accept.
Now, you could say the same Scott Morrison as well. So why not bring back Scott Morrison? I don't get it, Will. Why are we so down on former Prime Ministers?
This is the first time I'm going to disagree with you on this show, Andrew, which is weirdly thrilling. I don't think it would be I don't think it would be a good move, and I don't think it'd be a good move because of the politics of it, as opposed to what he has to offer, which is probably still quite a lot. His brand is toxic in a lot of the population, not just on the left, but unlike, say, a Tony Abbott, who is still admired on the right, he lost a lot of people during COVID, to the extent that I don't think it would be worth the political risk that would come and the perceived problems that would come with having him there. But I think what you mentioned at the end of your comments there is right.
Will, every single politician, just about every single politician in Australia shares the blame for that, almost every single one, for what happened in the pandemic. It wasn't just Scott Morrison. He went with the flow.
He was the Prime Minister, though, Andrew. He was the Prime Minister. But in any case, he was the Prime Minister.
Doing all the shoving, and he was having to follow them. He could have fought, you're quite right, but I'm not going to single one man out in a group hysteria, led by the media, I might just say too. Biggest dummy spit of the year, Louise, must go to a federal Liberal MP, or now ex-Liberal, Russell Broadbent, who today quit the Liberal Party 33 years after he was first elected, because he's lost pre-selection now for a seat of Monash. He got thumped by a woman, Mary Aldred, by 161 votes to just 16. So he's in such a snit, is going to sit as a backbencher instead. Fair enough?
Well, this is a case of losers all round. I mean, these situations are completely foreseeable, and I really don't understand why they have to happen in the public eye. There should be discussions that happen, you know, well before things like this, so it doesn't turn out that way. I mean, the guy, it's a long time. He'd be gutted, but it was a foreseeable situation.
No, but it's been in Parliament for a quarter of a century, all told, and never achieved much, never been promoted to a ministry. Is probably, you know, its locals say we would rather a younger, fresher, more promising candidate to represent us. There's nothing wrong with that.
No, and that's completely fair enough. I mean, the politics isn't forever, and you really need to realise that there's no guarantees. So, yeah, all is fair in love and politics, but that I do have some empathy for the guy too. So,
oh, look, I have empathy as well, but we're not there to be represented for empathy. Will, quick comment on that? I mean, the guy was elected as a Liberal. I think it's a betrayal of his electorate to now sit as something else.
No empathy from me, Andrew. I think the guy's a lightweight. He's been in politics longer than I've been alive, and in that time, he's never been on the front bench. He's been on the against the public mood on pretty much every major issue. Get rid of him. Get someone better in.
Good on you. Thank you very much. Good luck to you, Louise Elliot, and thank you so much, Will Kingston. After the break, a top banker warns that buying a house is now just for the rich, and one reason for that is an insane government policy few Australians like, but politicians refuse to change. More after this. The great Australian dream is now being destroyed by the politicians in Canberra, and that dream is owning your own home. Here's the boss of the ANZ Bank.
Sadly, I think home loans have become the preserve of the rich and the wealthy and the better off.
Now, owning your own home is actually a great civilising sort of thing. It's important to making young people particularly feel connected to this country, young men particularly feeling that they've got obligations and duties, and making the young committed to what makes this society work. It's very important. And it's not just higher interest rates that are destroying this dream, and it's not just because Australians have had the biggest fall in income in the developed world. Again, a political problem there. Joining me is Leith van Onselen, an economist who's worked for the Australian and Victorian Treasuries and is now co-founder of macrobusiness.com.au. Leith, thank you so much for your time. What else might have made housing too expensive for the poor of Australia?
Well, it's pretty obvious, Andrew. I mean, the major driver and the reason why we've got rising house prices in the face of massive interest rate hikes is because the federal government is basically fire hosing the nation with extra people through its immigration program. So just last financial year, we added about 500,000 net overseas migrants to Australia, and data released today by the ABS, their monthly arrivals data, suggested that the September quarter is going to be even stronger. So obviously, if you're going to fire hose that many people, and they're going to come into places like Sydney and Melbourne, that's going to push up house prices. And it's also obviously, you know, lifting up rents as well, which is adding to inflation. It's causing problems there, and that's also feeding into house prices. So we've got this diabolical situation where it's a case of demand and supply. Demand is being pushed through the roof by immigration, and that's basically making housing much less affordable.
Yeah, it's not as if we had 500,000 houses just let's say they came as couples, 250,000 homes empty, just waiting for them. I mean, it's just ridiculous. When we say, you know, more than 500,000 in just 1 year, how does that compare to past immigration intakes?
Oh, look, mate, it is off the charts. So just to put this into perspective, in the 15 years leading up to the pandemic, we had obviously big Australia immigration. We averaged about 220,000 a year. And the highest single year we had under the previous government was 260,000. So we're currently at about 500. And if anything, the September quarter is going to be higher again. So, you know, it is off the charts, the sort of population growth. And the problem with it is, Andrew, is we're actually, it's occurring at the same time as actual dwelling construction is collapsing. So just to put this into perspective, last financial year, Australia only added 170,000 homes. That's against a population increase, so immigration plus natural increase of about 630,000. And all the forward-looking indicators, whether you look at dwelling approvals, dwelling commencements, housing construction finance, they're all at about decade lows. And just to give you one last thing in a perspective, in the year to September, we only approved 164,000 homes. So that's basically the homes that will be built. And that's about 75,000 less than the Albanese government's 1.2 million homes target, which requires 240,000 homes a year. So we're not going to be anywhere near close. So they're basically ramping up immigration to levels we've never seen before, population growth, at the same time as our actual dwelling construction is collapsing, which just means we're going to have an even deeper housing crisis going forward.
And it's also explains why the Victorian government, among others, is punishing people with B&B properties with extra taxes, try and force them to convert them into permanent housing. I mean, there's going to be desperate measures coming up. But why then are governments so addicted to adding so many more people when survey after survey shows Australians are sick of having their cities bulging and the beaches crowded and the hospitals crowded and the public transport crowded and the roads crowded, and we've got now an infrastructure backlog, to try and cope with it. That's falling way behind and blowing its budget as well. Why then do governments keep doing this?
Well, there's basically two reasons, Andrew. So first of all, the Federal Treasury loves it because the Federal Treasury collects 80% of the tax revenues. So they effectively get all the extra personal income tax, company tax that you get from big migration. The problem is all the costs fall on the states. So the states and local governments collect about 20% of the taxes, but they're going to pay for all the infrastructure, the health, the education. Most of those costs fall on them. So it's kind of got this false, incentive system there. But the other one is all the major lobby groups that got all the money love big migration. So big business, big property, the universities, they all love it. So they're all obviously, they hire all these economists, shonks, etc., to effectively argue the case. And they basically, lobby the governments for big migration. And that's why we get it. Yet the Australian voters hate it.
Great for the rich, not so good for the poor. Letha Onselen, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. After the break, another school strike, but this time not for climate. It's to recruit students to march for Palestine. How dangerous is this? Plus, is it fair for a golf club to ban former Premier Daniel Andrews? More after the break. There are actually two school strikes coming up. There's the climate strike and one for Palestine. That's playing straight into the hands of Hamas. A school strike organised by Free Palestine Melbourne. Join me is Rowan Dean, editor of The Spectator Australian, host of Outsiders on Sky News every Sunday at 9 a.m. I never miss it. Rowan, the pro-Palestine lobby recruiting school children to go march for Palestine sounds really sus to me, very inflammatory.
Well, it's completely outrageous, Andrew, and certainly if I had a child at school who was likely to be going on this, I can't speak for other parents, but I would certainly be making sure my child did not attend school on that particular day, because I think this is just disgraceful. There's an argument for kids being exposed to, political, the ins and outs of politics and the big issues of the day and so on and so forth. But in this instance, we are seeing, we had 1,500 horrific murders, abductions, rapes, etc., etc. I won't go through all the gory details. And that should be the focus. Now, if these children are being taken by the teachers and demanding a ceasefire, as Penny Wong apparently did request and then didn't request, or whatever the latest nonsense going on in the Albanese government is, as they tear themselves apart trying to figure out how to not look like the craven cowards that they obviously are, what you would say, Andrew, is you would tell the kids, listen, we think, all wars are bad, and in order to make sure there's no further suffering, it would be good to have a ceasefire. And the conditions for a ceasefire are that, which can be organised tomorrow, is that the murderers, the murdering bastards who ruin so many lives, give themselves up and hand back every single hostage. That's the moral thing that we should be teaching our children, that if someone does something really bad, they must be punished and they must make amends. So until Hamas surrenders, everybody involved in that murderous rampage, until it gives back every single hostage, is accounted for, and until Hamas makes clear how it will pay reparations to every murdered family then that's the preconditions for a ceasefire. Sorry, Andrew.
They don't even need to do that. They just need to surrender themselves to captivity, and Israel will accept that. I mean, the idea, the ceasefire now is so dishonest, Rowan, because what are they saying? That after 2 or 3 days, okay, the war can continue. What they'll be marching in the streets then for? Another ceasefire, another ceasefire. It is a bull. I was going to say a bad word. It's a dishonest catch cry. Surrender Hamas should be the cry. But here's the thing. Here, have these Palestinian supporters asked themselves why so many of their protests are aggressive and even violent? Why Victorian police have had to rush 60 more officers to patrol Melbourne's Jewish areas, for instance. Why the office of Victorian Labor MP Kat Theophanous was defaced by pro-Palestinian activists because she supports Israel. You don't hear this level of harassment from pro-Israel supporters.
No, of course not. And this is where moral equivalency is so dangerous. And this is why teaching our children moral equivalency, we can see how it's polluted the minds of the left, of the trade unions, clearly of many teachers. This sort of moral equivalency is poisonous. We must teach our children, for the West, it's important that we teach our children the lessons of 2 world wars. We never want to see that sort of carnage again. And we learned that the only way to end that sort of carnage is a decisive surrender of those who wish you harm.
I must say, I've just come across the most pathetic example of anti-Semitism, in my opinion, from a Sydney company that provides jumping castles for parties. They refused the booking from Jewish parents and said they don't want their blood money. I mean, if that's not anti-Semitic, I don't know what is. But let's switch. Dan Andrews, a Victorian Premier, you know, no friend of our show, and we're no friend of his. The most savagely repressive Premier during the pandemic, and an authoritarian to boot, is reportedly facing a ban from joining the Portsea Golf Club. Bit swish there. One supposed reason that I read in the media is that he locked down the Mornington Peninsula, where the course is during the pandemic. Rowan, a ban on a Premier, is it fair enough or petty?
Well, Andrew, I would have gone the other way. I would have allowed Dan Andrews to join my golf club. And then the moment he was out on the tee by himself or with his friends about to tee off, a group of police officers would have rushed on, tackled him to the ground, forced him to wear a mask, dragged him off, tasered him, shot rubber bullets at him, and given him the treatment that he gave so many people during COVID. I would have gone that way myself personally. And then I would have had a flight of stairs down from a beach cottage down to the lawn and seen whether he could walk in a straight line without falling off it before I gave him his membership dues to the club. Sorry, I'm just being sarcastic, obviously.
But I think, in a sense, you can understand it because you remember during the pandemic, I hate petty revenge policies. I've got to put it there. But I will say this. During the pandemic, don't forget that the Premier actually banned people from playing golf in the open air, which was about the safest place they could possibly be. Yes. Wide open fairways, fresh air, rather than cooped up, breathing in other people's oxygen, carbon dioxide emissions. I mean, seriously, you'd be a bit cranky as a golfer yourself if you had done that to your club, wouldn't you?
Well, I think we could go the other way. We could put Dan down in the basement. They could have one of those little things that you used to see in businessmen's offices, and Dan could have the 20th hole or the 19th hole or whatever it is and practice that all day long because it's too dangerous to go outdoors. You might pick up a virus. You never know. Some bit of wind, some grandma might walk past you and you might kill her if you're out there. So I think the golf club could have a bit of fun.
Just quickly, only a few seconds left, half a minute left. Sky News' documentary Liberals in Power by Chris Kenny will be straight on after this show. It had great ratings yesterday. It's really, for me, all that backstabbery. I know the Liberals are now out of power, but I have the feeling I'm getting more confident about the ability of Peter Dutton to actually make the Liberals stand for something now.
100%. Andrew, I'm going to repeat it here. I'm going to repeat it for the next 18 months. Peter Dutton will be the next Prime Minister. Thank goodness because we cannot carry on with this madness, this moral equivalency of the left. We need a Peter Dutton government. Since The Voice, he's found a way to do it. He will win the next election. No problems at all.
Mate, I'd laugh at you.
There you go. You can record it.
A couple of other big calls.
Paul Barry can record it.
I will. Look, you've said it often enough. It'll be there. Rowan Deep, thank you so much for your time. And coming up next is Liberals in Power with Chris Kenny. Good night.